Oh, this is good. Yeah, now I can hear you now.
Okay.
Good. Yeah. Okay. All right. How are you, Ann?
I'm fine. I'm a little bit bushed, and I apologize. I didn't have time to wash my hair.
Well,
So
that's quite all right. I know the feeling well. So tell us briefly about you were involved in all sorts of meetings and votes, and so just tell us about what happened.
Well, first let me say I'm right now in Portland, Oregon, at the Grassroots Radio Conference.
Okay.
And that's a national conference. There are people from all over the country here, and a number of people from the Pacifica Radio Network, which is 5 metropolitan stations in Berkeley, Los Angeles, Houston, New York, and Washington, D.C. And it also includes 200 affiliate stations around the country who play some of the metropolitan stations' programming and produce some of their own. And this structure is governed, so to speak, by a national board. And we were able to persuade the national board to pass a resolution in support of Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. And in fact, let me see, the vote was, it was 12 yes, 0 no, 4 abstaining, and 3 not voting. Oops, did I lose it there?
No, I'm here. I can see you.
I went to check my note about the votes. So we're really pleased about this. And a lot of people got behind us. Daniel Ellsberg endorsed it. So did Joe Lauria, who we've been speaking to. Dennis Bernstein, who is the host of Flash. And I wrote something about this in the Bayview, San Francisco Bayview Counterpunch. And, you know, I published the resolution we were asking them to pass. And Oliver Stone wrote to the Pacifica National Board. And I don't think anyone particularly solicited him to do that. I think that he just read the piece and did it himself. So let's see, what else can I say about this? I'll tell you what some of the argument was. There were a few people who said, well, who's going to care if Pacifica Radio does this? And I said, look, if you keep thinking you're insignificant, you will be. And there was some, we tried to pass it on a local level at KPFA, and there was some resistance there, which I suspect had to do with the Democratic Party and their feeling that Assange cost Hillary the election. But nobody came out and said that. They just kept putting it at the bottom of the agenda so that it wasn't voted on. But now that the national board has passed it, I think it's very likely that the local board will as well. And one of the people who is on the national board who put forward the motion and then motivated it said, we really need to do this because the major media have all deserted Assange. The National Press Club, the U.S. Overseas Press Club, Reuters. The Reuters news agency was standing up for Assange until 2011. 2 years into Obama's presidency, they all stopped supporting him. And the Pacifica Radio Network is non-commercial. It's totally supported by subscribers. And it's always saying, you know, our ID is that we will bring you the news that no one else will bring you. So it would have been very inconsistent for us not to pass this resolution, and I'm really glad we did. Now they're going to have a press release on the website, and it will be up to others to create news out of it. Because of course, it's not going to mean anything unless it's reported as news. I put the report on the KPFA Evening News for tonight. I will put it on SoundCloud, and I will share it on Twitter and Facebook.
Excellent. That's great. But it's interesting what you were saying. I thought there'd be more opposition from the people who do think that Julian Assange cost Hillary Clinton the election, because that is such a powerful and ridiculous strand of thought. You'd find a lot of opposition based on that.
Well, nobody came right out and said that in negotiations on the two boards. But that sentiment is definitely there. And there's, a large part, at least of the KPFA audience and staff, who are very committed to the Democratic Party and are horrified that Hillary lost and Trump won. And there is what I call Trump derangement syndrome, which is this shallow reduction of all politics to Trump and anti-Trump.
Yes.
And and unfortunately, what has come with that is some degree of Russophobia. Some
degree. It's quite a powerful degree. Yes.
Yeah. Well, no. What I mean is, it's surprising that there's buy-in at the station, or within the Pacifica Network, and there is some buy-in at KPFA. I wrote a piece about this, which is in the Black Agenda Report. It's called "We Love the CIA," or "How the Left Lost Its Mind," because I heard people on prominent Sunday morning time saying twice. I think it was the same scholar who came on twice and said, "Well, we just have to trust the CIA for now." It's
that's right. Well, in fact, I mean, you've seen. I mean, it's now what we call the liberal media: New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, MSNBC.
The Guardian.
They are the main purveyors of Russophobia. I mean, they come up with nonsense about Russia that that would put Joe McCarthy to shame. I mean, the Russians are the embodiment of evil. They're at one and the same time ubiquitous. They're everywhere. They're behind every malevolent action anywhere in the world, and at the same time, they're just a gas station masquerading as a country. They love to quote that John McCain inanity. And that's the liberal media. That's not even Fox News. I mean, Fox News kind of goes along with that, but you're getting this from what is the liberal media.
Well, Fox News and the Trump supporting media will say that yes, Russia's a real problem. We have to be afraid of Russia. We have to escalate on NATO's borders because of Russia, et cetera, et cetera. They're interfering in our life one way or another, but they didn't elect Trump.
Yes, that's right. They accept that they interfered in the election, but they don't go the next step, which MSNBC does. Oh, he won the election because of the Russians. So, no, yes, they interfered in the election because they're really bad people, but they didn't elect Trump. Trump won fair and square, had nothing.
Yeah, exactly. Like Devin Nunes. Devin Nunes is the head of the House Intelligence Committee, and
the House Intelligence Committee.
Intelligence Committee, and he has gone on to various kind of cable news outlets and said that he was warning about Russian interference way back when Obama was president during the midterm elections. I can't remember whether he said he's a Republican. I can't remember whether he said Russia was responsible for electing.
I've heard him say exactly what you just said. That's right. And then you get Fox panel news anchors who say, "Oh, look, New York Times and Obama attacked Romney in 2012 when Romney warned about the evil Russians and how Russia is the great existential threat. Yeah. Look, Romney was right, and he was being made fun of by Obama."
Oh yeah. It's pathetic. It's pathetic that the Democrats can't accept responsibility for losing that election.
Of course.
So out of touch with what used to be their base.
Yes,
with.
yes, yeah, exactly. Now, you were talking about recently about NATO and the as a protection racket.
You were talking about that.
Yes, but I think you're obviously on. This is something that you've thought about as well.
Well, what you said about that on, I guess it was the second vigil.
Yeah, or maybe the first or second.
Yeah. You said that the U.S. started violating its agreements, started reneging on its agreements with Russia as soon as the Cold War was over.
Yep.
And it broke its promise to Gorbachev.
Yes.
And began moving troops up to the NATO border. Up to the Eastern European borders with Russia.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's right. Yeah. That's right.
And then these Eastern European countries got very nervous, and because Russia responded with NATO coming to its borders. Russia responded. Then the Eastern European countries got very nervous. NATO moved and said, "Hey, nice place you got here. When did something happen?"
That's it. That's exactly it. So it's like, the official line of the West, the United States, is that every country has a right to join NATO. Russia doesn't have a veto power over NATO, which itself is an idiotic argument. Of course,
hasn't Russia repeatedly tried to join NATO?
Russia did suggest that at one point, but what's interesting is that there is no right not to join NATO. So it's like countries that don't want to join NATO really don't have that right. I mean, so they are bullied, cajoled, threatened. So you've seen this in Montenegro. I mean, the Montenegro has now joined NATO. But NATO wasn't taking any chances. They never had a referendum on the subject because they had a pretty good idea that the referendum would go against NATO. So they managed to get Montenegro into NATO, even though they avoided the referendum, and came up with a whole ridiculous story about how the Russians were trying to thwart the democratic will in Montenegro. They were trying to stage a coup, nonsense. And now you had the same thing now in Macedonia.
Yeah, I was about to ask you about that.
Yeah, that you had this massive intervention in Macedonia. They wanted to get Macedonia accept this new name of Northern Macedonia, and that way, then Macedonia can join the EU and NATO, and Greece would end its objections to it. And the Macedonians weren't buying it, so they had this referendum last week. 35% showed up. 65% refused to show up. So NATO, instead of saying, look, basically, we don't have it. We don't have the votes, that we need at least a 50% quorum. Said, no, this is a great victory. Onward, Macedonia is now on its path towards NATO. I mean, so it's, that NATO will seize and say, yeah, that's it. 35%, that's good enough for us. So this is so there is no right not to join NATO. There's only they say there's the right to join NATO, but no right not to join NATO. Well, and of course, even that discourse is ridiculous, because to say that Russia has no veto power, of course, it's like saying, well, does Mexico have a right to have a military alliance with Russia if it wanted to? I mean, would the United States accept? Yeah, we have no veto power. Sure, we can have. We're happy with Russian bases on our borders. We don't have a problem. Russian bases on the Mexico border. No, we don't have a problem with Russians basing submarines and tanks and everything in Mexico. No, we don't have a problem. No veto power there. I mean, it's absurd. Of course, countries have a veto power if they think that something is a threat to them.
Yeah. There's something I wanted to get back to, bringing this to Julian. Yesterday, there was some news reported by Sputnik, and so far as I can tell, only by Sputnik. And the headline was, Ecuador's foreign ministry reaffirms asylum for Julian Assange.
Yes.
And so I've been wondering, how serious is this? And also, I'm noticing that it's not reported. The last time I checked, it wasn't being reported by anyone else. And instead, they were still all over this story that, was it? I think they were saying that Ecuador wanted to make Julian a diplomat, an Ecuadorian diplomat, so that he could safely walk from the Ecuadorian embassy to the Russian embassy.
Right. No, I think Lenin Moreno would be perfectly happy to throw him out onto the curb, but he doesn't have the support in the country to do that, and he doesn't really have any support in the rest of Latin America. I mean, the OAS was going to take a very dim view of that. So I think his Moreno's hope now is that basically to starve him out, so that they'll reach a point at which maybe Julian will get so sick that he'll need some kind of emergency medical treatment, and he'll have to go to hospital, and then he'll be arrested, or he'll get so depressed and unhappy about being cut off from friends and family and from all communication with the outside world that he'll just walk out and say, I've had enough. That's clearly his hope, because he's not really going to be able to carry out his policy of just. I mean, it'll be such a humiliating, contemptible gesture on the part of Ecuador that, they just can't live. He won't be able to live that down. So yeah, so I think that's, I think he's got this, the status, this asylum status, until something happens, whether it's sickness or something like that will somehow take care of the situation from Moreno's point of view.
Well, but it's not really asylum status that's been confirmed, because asylum status would include his right to speak out,
absolutely,
and
exactly,
and his right to see visitors.
Exactly. He's being denied what's supposedly guaranteed by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I mean, exactly. Information, the right to information. So the idea that, we're going to deny him internet access, that's a basic human right he's being denied. You have a right to information. You have a right to speak. You have a right to associate with whomever you want. I mean, so his basic rights are being denied. So, as you say, that's not asylum. That's just simply illegality. Yeah. I mean, it's a violation of human rights.
Right, and we can speculate about why this happened. It's occurred to me that it might be, and I'm sure I'm not the only one, that the U.S. doesn't really want him back because there are so many image problems to handle with prosecuting and imprisoning him. One of them that I've thought about is that it could say that the information that Julian leaked is not admissible in court because it's still classified. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure it is. Like, the Pentagon Papers were not declassified until 2011. So I don't know whether Daniel Ellsberg could have, or his lawyers could have introduced them in court in his defense.
Well, you could probably hold a trial in camera. In other words, it'll be top secret trial, no media access, and I mean, I'm sure they can get around it. Say, oh, this is so secret that we can't possibly allow anybody to cover this trial. Because this is the most classified information known to man. Is going.
Yeah,
I think they would get around it somehow. But I think they'd love to have to make a lesson of him. Don't anyone ever try to do this again. And so it obviously there won't be a proper trial. If it were a proper trial, of course, the whole thing would collapse, because the idea is absurd. I mean, how can he be engaged in espionage when he's not even an American citizen? I mean, it's just it's a common sense is a violation. I mean, just extradited to the United States. He's not even the British have no jurisdiction over him. He's not a British citizen. He has no residence rights in Britain. The British just have no jurisdiction to extradite him to any country.
I think they can probably, he could probably be tried for espionage in the US, because espionage just means publishing classified materials. I don't think it's not treason. He couldn't be prosecuted for treason here because he's not a citizen.
Well, that's a good question. But on the other hand, he didn't really. Espionage would somehow involve your getting this information. You somehow stole this information that you're not entitled to. He's a publisher, and I think that he's as much a publisher as the New York Times is a publisher, the Guardian is a publisher. As long as you're not the one who actually stole the information, as long as you're not the one who signed the Official Secrets Act and therefore I think it's hard to make a case that you're a spy.
Well, that's true. Glenn Greenwald wrote about this in The Intercept, and he said that technically Julian could be prosecuted for this, for publishing classified documents.
Is that what Glenn Greenwald said?
Well, he said that, but he said there's only one instance a couple of centuries ago, maybe even 3 centuries.
Yeah, I think it was at the time of that's right, probably around the time of the World War I or something like that.
No, I think it's even further back. But anyway, whatever.
Okay.
Typically, publishers have not been prosecuted, only leakers. So that's
right. That's right. So that's why Daniel Ellsberg was in danger of prosecution, but the New York Times wasn't. So So the same thing applies now. So you had Chelsea Manning. He's in danger of prosecution, but then you can't. That's why they tried to make a case that Julian Assange was in on it with Manning, and that somehow he egged on Manning to steal the information. But they've never really been able to make any sort of a case that he at any time egged Manning on to steal anything. Yeah. So, but they did try to do that. I think what they will probably try with Julian is they're going to try and suggest that he was working along and that he's part of somehow the Russian GRU. He was involved in all of those things that Mueller has been charging the GRU with, and that the other day the U.S. Justice Department came up with another indictment about the cyber hacking from the GRU. I think they will want to suggest that Julian is really part of this GRU cyber hacking network. I think that's ridiculous as well, but I think that's probably what they're going to try and prove.
Yeah, well, they have been. Whoops. But they keep indicting Russians who will never be extradited to the US, and then the press treats the indictments like
as proof, as evidence. That's exactly right. So they'll never get their hands on those people, but I think that they could get their hands on Julian, but it's not going to be any kind of a trial. It's not going to be a real trial. It'll all be done in secret, and and there'll be a verdict will come down, guilty and whatever. So, but we'll never actually find out what actually transpired during this trial.
Do you mind if I jump in for a second here?
Yes, absolutely.
On the issue of the New York Times publishing and the Washington Post the Pentagon Papers, what the government could not do was prior restraint. In other words, it could not stop a newspaper from publishing something in advance, which is what the Department of Justice in the Nixon administration tried to do. That's illegal. But once published, they are subject to prosecution. Greenwald is right. So Julian could be prosecuted, but it's never been done, except back in the 17th century, as Ann was alluding to, the John Peter Zenger trial in colonial New York. William Cosby was the governor general of New York at the time, and he prosecuted this publisher, John Peter Zenger, because he wrote something critical of the governor general. So that's the only time it's known to have happened in North America, in the U.S., what became the U.S. But so it's unlikely to happen. And they would be setting a big precedent if they did prosecute Assange. He cannot be prosecuted for espionage because he didn't steal the documents, as you pointed out, George. So he was only publishing them. But he is liable to prosecution, but it hasn't happened since 17th century. I know all this from the research I did on a book I did about the Pentagon Papers that Dan Ellsberg wrote the foreword to. It was about Mike Gravel, the senator who read the papers. I just wanted to jump in, if you don't mind. Thank you.
So just let me ask a question. So you're saying the New York Times could have been prosecuted for what? For what exactly?
For having published classified information after they published it, not before. So the government cannot stop you in advance from doing that. There's no prior restraint. And that's what the government tried to do. That's why the Times won in the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court ruled in favor of the New York Times because the government did not have the right under the Constitution to use prior restraint to stop a newspaper from publishing anything. Right. But after publication, they're liable to it. I know this directly from Senator Mike Gravel because an amendment in the Constitution also allows a member of Congress to, when they're in a legislative act, to say whatever they want. They cannot be questioned going to or from the Congress in an active. So when you're in the middle of the floor of the Senate or the House or anywhere where a U.S. Senate or House meeting takes place, even outside the Capitol building, you can say any declassified information you want. You could. Dick Durbin said we knew that there were no WMD, but I couldn't say it was classified. He was lying. He could say it, and he could not be prosecuted for it. So Senator Mike Gravel read the Pentagon Papers into the record after Daniel Ellsberg gave it to him. He could not be prosecuted for that. However, he then went to Beacon Press in Boston and had the papers published in 4 volumes, with the 5th volume by Noam Chomsky and Howard Zinn. That he could have been prosecuted for. Nixon could have gone after Gravel. Gravel has told me that himself because it was done outside of the Congress and it was classified information and it was published. So those are the 2 protections: no prior restraint for a newspaper, and a congressman has protection in the middle of an act. But afterward, publishing classified information can make you liable to prosecution. But it hasn't happened since the 17th century. Only once.
So, and that's sort of applicable to anyone in the world, even though not a U.S. citizen. So Julian
well,
Assange.
if you that's interesting because he didn't do it on U.S. territory. If you're in the U.S. and you're a foreign national and you commit an American crime, of course you could be arrested and prosecuted like anybody anywhere else in the world. You remember the film Midnight Express, the American thrown in a Turkish jail because of a drug violation. It was perfectly legal for the Turks to arrest and imprison him. But he was outside the country. So now I don't know what I'm talking about. I did up until now. I pretty much know what I'm talking about because I researched that fully for the book. But whether a foreign national, as Assange is, if he breaks an American law while he was outside U.S. territory, I don't know the answer to that question, whether he can be brought to the U.S. and then prosecuted here.
Right. Well, that's very interesting.
Okay. Yeah. See you later.
Okay. Thanks for that clarification.
Thanks for that intervention.
Yeah.
Okay. Up here.
Yes. So I think I think we were talking about was it the NATO? I mean, it was.
No, that was NATO was before, but no, we were talking about whether or not Julian could be prosecuted and how.
Right. So I think so. Joe says that he could be. So yeah.
But I was saying that it's possible that the United States doesn't really want him back because it would be so awkward to prosecute him. Yes, they could throw him into an in-camera trial and then throw him in prison. But even though the U.S. typically does whatever it wants, goes to war in Iraq, despite 20 million people demonstrating all over the world, it's still involved in perception management. And
yes.
Even in the Iraq War, it put a lot of effort into perception management. And speaking of which, regarding Robert Mueller, I imagine you've seen the video of Robert Mueller testifying in Congress.
Yes, I have. Yes.
That
the great truth sayer, the great figure of the resistance. The hero of the resistance. Yeah. So yeah, eager purveyor of lies on Iraq. But of course, he was eager purveyor of lies about everything else. Remember the anthrax, and just about whatever nonsense we've had over the years. Mueller is always at the center of it. So yeah, remember anthrax, which was one of the big FBI cases of the last couple of decades. I mean, the FBI got it completely wrong. I mean, they went after the wrong man, and Mueller never so much as apologized or anything that they actually drove a guy to suicide by through FBI persecution. So, I mean, how he suddenly become this hero of resistance is this. Is kind of yet another kind of laughable consequence of the Trump derangement syndrome.
Well, it should be noted about Mueller also that he put in time as counsel for Lockheed Martin.
Yes, he did. Yes, that's very good. That's right. Yes, he that. Yes.
I'm sure he has plenty of stock options and therefore has a financial interest in this ongoing farcical military relation with Russia, which, as you pointed out, is totally built on a manufactured threat.
Yeah, completely, and justifies the ever bigger budgets. I mean, there's Mattis, Mad Dog Mattis, constantly whipping up hysteria about Russia, which of course we're ready for these giant budgets. And you also have to remember these budgets. They say, the Pentagon budget's a $700 billion. That's not how much the real defense budget is, because that's just what the Pentagon appropriates. When you can't put everyone else in, the intelligence agencies, the Department of Energy, which handles the nuclear weapons programs, when you count or the Department of Homeland Security, or everything else. That is, a hell of a lot of money that goes into the national security state. So, I mean, to keep justifying these extraordinary budgets, you have to keep whipping up the hysteria. Otherwise, it's all gonna collapse. People are going to start asking questions. Well, what are we spending all this money on?
Yeah, and I'll tell you, with regard to how much the press deceives us and why we so need Julian. Last night, there was a historic event in U.S. politics where the first time a Democratic incumbent, in this case, Barbara Lee, who many think to be the most progressive congressperson in the U.S., debated a Green candidate.
Which candidate? A Green candidate. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Party candidate. Because we have something out here called the two-party primary. A Green second. It means the people who come in first and second in the primary, their names go on the ballot in the general election. So this is the case in three races, in three congressional races out here. The other two are in Southern California. Where you have very idealistic young Greens going up against Democratic Party loyalists who vote how they're told, and their opponents, their Democratic opponents, have refused to debate them or even acknowledge the existence of their campaigns, which is typical. That's what the Democrats usually do. They just pretend that the Greens or independent candidates don't exist.
Okay.
Well, we've got to give it to Barbara Lee for doing this. But my point about the press was the only press there to cover this was our radio station, KPFA.
Yeah. That's well. I mean, you're doing terrific work there. I mean, you're really to be congratulated for your tireless efforts and getting all these votes. It's magnificent.